Coming up on July 25th at an unspecified venue in Australia, Tim Tszyu will be fighting the longtime out of the ring Errol Spence Jr. in a highly anticipated 50-50 matchup. Let's get into this one. So currently, Tim Tszyu, the former WBO Super Welterweight champion, has a record of 27 wins, 3 losses, and 0 draws. 18 of his wins come by way of knockout, giving him a perfect 2/3 knockout ratio with the amount of wins he has. He is 31 years of age. He is 5'8.5" with the 70-inch reach. He is the son of the highly ranked and well-known boxer of the 2000s, Tysu, who was like a half Russian boxer who was the unified champion at a certain point and destroyed Zab Judah. I don't know too much about Tysu, but I do know that Tim Tszyu is the son, and he has been a world champion at some point. On the other hand, there is Errol Spence Jr., who has 28 wins and 1 loss. His only loss comes by an all-time great in Terence Crawford, so it's not really a bad loss there. Well, not a bad loss in terms of the person he lost to, but it was a bad loss just in general. Spence has 22 wins by way of knockout, and he is an inch taller than Tim Tszyu with a 72-inch reach. Spence has not fought in the ring for 3 years now. So essentially when this fight comes, it would have essentially been exactly 3 years since Spence has fought. And considering this, I think this fight is closer than many people might give credit toward. Now, I feel like that a lot of individuals, a lot of boxing pundits will be picking Tim Tszyu. Considering that Spence's last performance wasn't particularly great, or he was made to look quite average against Terence Crawford. Furthermore, Spence has been out of the ring for 3 years. But one thing I'll say about Spence is that he has had a lot of ups and downs for injuries throughout his career. He got into a very bad car accident at a certain point. I think he's had other injuries here and there that have affected his performances in the ring. Spence actually had a 1.5-year layoff between his Danny Garcia fight and his Ugas fight, in which he essentially, I think this is when the car crash happened. And Spence has had, long layoffs before. He had a fight in September of 2019 against Sean Porter, and then a year and 3 months later, he fought Danny Garcia. But this will be Spence's longest layoff. On the other hand, Tim Tszyu has been quite active. He fought in 2025 3 times. He fought in 2024 twice, and he's overall fought many opponents here and there, following his second loss to Fundora by a retirement in the 7th round. I personally think that Tim Tszyu is a very good offensive fighter. He can easily dispose of and dominate regional level competition. He has good footwork, offensively speaking, and I think his feet are pretty good. His power is something that I think was a little bit overrated. Now, I think that Tszyu definitely has power, but I think his power is not as prominent as many people are giving him. Now, I understand why individuals thought Tim Tszyu was a power puncher. Ultimately, he is a pressure boxer that puts a lot of force into his punches, but I don't think he's really the most powerful puncher, but he's not a weak puncher in the slightest way. I think he's kind of like on par with a Canelo. Now, Canelo might have more power than Tim Tszyu, but kind of in that range of not being a full knockout puncher, but more so an individual that just has power right above the average, something I think Canelo has. And I think Canelo's better at breaking opponents down and then knocking them out rather than having full-blown knockout power designed to just one-punch his opponents. And I think Tszyu has a similar amount of power. Now, Tszyu definitely is not as good as Canelo in any way, but Tszyu does have a pretty good pressure style that recently has been successful against regional level opponents. When Tszyu was the WBO champion, and leading up to when he was the champion, he had shown that he had decent power. But I think Tszyu, prior to the first Fundora loss, had a lot more wrinkles to his game. Not only did he have effective pressure, he also had a little bit of a better defense, I would say, and he seemed a little bit more imposing in the ring. I would also say that Tszyu has definitely lost maybe really some of his confidence overall. And I think this confidence, this loss of it, is kind of why he doesn't seem as imposing. His defense, I think, is still quite leaky, and it's gotten a little bit worse. His punch resistance is still quite questionable right now. Fundora was able to knock him down. I don't think Fundora 2 is the hardest puncher. Fundora is a hard puncher. I don't think he's the hardest puncher, and he was able to knock Tim Tszyu down. Murtazaliev ultimately is the one that is being framed as the individual who took away Tszyu's punch resistance, but I think that is still a question that needs to be answered. On the other hand, Errol Spence, I don't really think he needs much of an introduction. He's ultimately a volume puncher, death by 1,000 cuts type of individual, very accurate, good amount of stamina, speed, and skill in the ring generalship. He has a great amount of skill. And he's fought much better competition than Tszyu. Ultimately, at the end of the day, Spence does have an extreme experience advantage, and I think a lot of the things that Tszyu will be throwing at Spence are things that Spence would have already seen throughout his career at a higher level. A lot of Spence's opponents have been much more skillful, and considering that Tszyu kind of has just this come forward pressure style without the proper amount of defense to back up that pressure style is what worries me about Tszyu. And considering the fact that Tszyu's punch resistance might be in question, and that I think his power actually could have an effect on Spence, but ultimately I think Spence will be crafty enough to avoid many of Tszyu's onslaughts and offensive movements, and ultimately I think Spence will be able to overcome the pressure style of Tszyu. Ultimately, I think that Spence will be able to shed the ring rust, but that will take quite a few rounds. I think in rounds 1 through 2 or 3, Tszyu will probably come forward and win many of the early rounds. But ultimately, I think that once Spence finds a groove, something I think he'll actually find quite quickly, even despite a damaging loss to Crawford, I think Spence actually still has enough left. And I think Spence will have enough left even now that he'll be able to overcome someone like a Tim Tszyu. So for my official prediction, I have Errol Spence Jr. winning by a 116-112 unanimous decision, where I think that Tszyu will essentially sweep some of the early rounds, but where Spence will start making the fight competitive in the mid rounds and ultimately bank all the later rounds to win a clear-cut decision. I also think that once Spence has some success, that his confidence will spike extremely while Zoo's might lower somewhat, because Spence is a very crafty and well-experienced individual that is not necessarily going to get pushed back by Zoo. So I would have to go for Errol Spence in this one, even considering such a long layoff out of the ring. Let me know what you think. I can understand a case for why Zoo would win, especially because of this layoff and the damaging loss Spence took in his last fight. But let me know. And this is Zachary Cloutier at Ringside.